Right. Thanks, Beverly. Hi, everyone. One of the joys of being in the graveyard shift, of course, is that most of the speakers that have gone before have covered most of the material you wanted to talk about. But I'll tell you anyhow. So yes, looking at the challenges of estimating greenhouse gas at a farm level. And again, Peter and I have just covered this in slightly more detail, but I'll go through it quickly. In the sense, your ruminant animal eats the pasture, goes into the rumen. The bugs turn into volatile fatty acids, which are the basis for the production and maintenance of the animal. They produce hydrogen as a byproduct, which is converted by methogens into methane, which is quite handy because if they didn't do that, the hydrogen would kill the bugs and eventually kill the animal. So 95 to 98% of that methane is burped at the front end of the animal, the rest goes out the back end. In terms of nitrous oxide, as I sort of walked you through, you've got the urine coming out the rear end. The urea's, soil microbes, if you like, convert it from urea into ammonia, into nitrate, and hence into nitrous oxide. So there's a bit of a process through that. In terms of measuring it at a farm level, obviously you can't directly measure the emissions as such. You can't sort of cover the entire farm and collect the gases as such. So you need to use models. And the models, if you like, run on emission factors, which have been calculated, and I'll go into that in a minute. In terms of the methane emissions, factors based on dry matter intake, and nitrous oxide emission factors, which are based on the amount of nitrogen applied or deposited by animals. And we use a model at a national level in terms of calculating the national inventory. And I just wanted to step you through some of this because it also applies, the same methodology applies to the likes of overseer and calculating on-farm emissions as well. So there's a generic approach. So in terms of animal production, the number of animals, we're able to calculate metabolizable energy requirements. That's based on the Aussie feeding standards. You then couple that with the ME content in the diet, so you can get an indication of the total dry matter intake, which then coupled with the methane emission factor gives you an indication of methane emissions. And there's been quite a lot of work done in New Zealand now in terms of calculating that methane emission factor in terms of methane per kilogram of dry matter intake. And similarly, if you like, on the nitrous oxide side, so we've got an estimate of total dry matter intake. If you know the protein or nitrogen content of the food, you can calculate total nitrogen intake. You know that the amount of protein or nitrogen gone off in products, so you know the amount of total nitrogen excreted. And there's three factors to that, if you like, in terms of effluent, urine and dung, which all have their individual emission factors. In addition to which, you've got your nitrogen fertiliser, and which now has three emission factors depending on the type of nitrogen fertiliser. And again, there's been quite a bit of work done to determine those nitrogen emission factors, nitrogen oxide. Now, this little beast is called a horrendogram. And the reason for showing you this exciting sort of stuff is just to emphasise the degree of complexity that you need to step through in modelling at a farm level. So in terms of methane, talked about this in terms of the methane emission factor. There's been quite a number of research trials done. We're now very, very confident in terms of the emission factor, which, as you can see, there's 21.6 grams per kilogram of dry matter intake. There is some variation around that, a little bit from animals, and as Peter mentioned earlier, some variation depending on on feed or different feedstuffs such as forage rape, and also if you feed relatively death-defying levels of fodder beet. Nitrous oxide emissions from dung or urine and dung from grazing animals. Again, there's been a wide range of trials done on that, and there have been some New Zealand specific data developed from that. At this stage, the confidence, if you like, is in the average emission factor, but there is quite a range depending on things such as soil and climate, which affect the nitrification bugs in the soil, if you like, do affect that. And similarly for emission factors from effluent and fertiliser, again, a reasonable number of trials that have been carried out. Again, there's some degree of confidence in average values, and again, there is some variability around that because of the soil and climate type factors. So then moving on, looking at collating information at a farm level, this is always interesting. And just to concentrate a little bit on overseer, if you like, in terms of developing up an overseer file, you need to be able to collect quite a lot of data and verify this. Now that's just an example drawing on the water quality side of things and developing up nitrogen reference points or nitrogen discharge allowances in terms of the information that needs to be gathered across quite a range of factors, which I won't go into there. You can see them there. The interesting thing is these NDAs or NRPs, whatever you want to call them, are very legal numbers these days, so you need to be able to verify exactly how you've derived them. So in terms of all that information that you'd feed into overseer, for example, you need to verify it in terms of tracking farm accounts, invoices, receipts, farm diaries, all that sort of thing. Now the joy, of course, is in many instances information is not readily available. So in that case, you have to rely on either the farmer or particularly the consultant assumptions, which you have to specify out and hope that the council accepts that. And the reason for mentioning all that is if greenhouse gas gets carried into the same situation, then exactly the same sort of rules apply, in the sense that it will be imperative to get the information and verify it. And again, this has been talked about by earlier speakers. Over the next decade, probably 2 decades, most, if not all, farms in New Zealand will end up with a farm environment plan. Common sense would indicate that if, in terms of greenhouse gases, they should be a component of that farm environment plan. Let's only do it once. So fingers crossed, common sense applies. Now, just to move on a little bit, these are some figures from some of the work that's been done, a lot of it mine, just to give you some average and range emission factors from a couple of the sectors there. The dairy information is from a stratified national sample from Dairy NZ, so it's pretty sound. The sheep and beef data is not quite as sound, that's just from 30 or so farms that I've done, so that could be improved. The main thing there is to look at that range, which is pretty significant, which all comes back to the intensity and how that farm is being managed. Same time, there's just a sample of results from on-farm modelling work that we've done. This is for dairying. Again, I'm not going to go through all that. You can look at the figures, but it's not necessarily straightforward. And that's a similar sort of sample, if you like, from the sheep and beef sector. The interesting thing is, so where I am at, if you like, is I can say, in terms of farm system change, we can probably get between 5 and 10% reduction in greenhouse gases. Sometimes more, sometimes less. The impact on profitability is variable. In some cases, we've improved profitability. In most cases, we've decreased profitability. And the unfortunate thing is we haven't as yet come up with a magic bullet, which I don't think we will. And just to make the point around farm system change, they can be quite complex. And I just wanted to walk you very quickly through an example, if you like, in terms of changing lambing percent. So I'm sitting there, my lambing percent's 120, and I think, well, let's go to 160, which is highly possible. So how do I get there? You look at the genetics of your flock. You need to probably feed your ewes better through the spring, because that sets the limit on your fertility. You need to feed them well in the autumn, because that sets the limit on your fecundity. You need to grow and feed your hoggets better to grow them up to target weights and all that sort of stuff. In terms of the spring, you've got all these extra lambs running around, so you have to feed the ewes and the lambs that much better. You could shift your lambing date slightly later, if you like, to help with that. But then you've got the issue of making sure you finish those lambs to target weights within set time periods. You could look at reducing your capital stock numbers to allow a bit of extra feed coming through. And by the way, that's the only thing that's going to give you significant greenhouse gas changes. So in terms of all this extra feeding that has to happen, you have to balance it out with all the other stock that's on your property. And that's where the farm modelling is so necessary, to work your way through the complexity of all those different issues and look at what the implications are, both in terms of feed and money and environmental impact. We've also looked at a range of land use change issues, particularly forestry. We've also done a bit of horticultural work. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of all this. Forestry as a carbon offset is actually quite complex, very complex. And has been mentioned before, it's not a permanent solution. What it does is gain you, let's say, 30 years before hopefully we come up with some degree of technological breakthrough which is a much more permanent solution. One of the big issues is that it adds a complexity to your farm modelling situation, in the sense that, well, the way we've been doing it, use FarmX for your farm system, you use Overseer for your nutrient and greenhouse gas type impact, and then you used spreadsheeting to pull all that together and build in your forestry annuity and your carbon sequestration. So you end up with some pretty impressive spreadsheets. So in terms of modelling, and I think Harry touched on this a little bit this morning, it would be easy enough to go down what we call the simple route, if you like, in the sense that you could take your stock numbers and your stock type and just apply your per animal emission factor, and bang, you've got a figure. The advantage of that, simple and quick. The disadvantage is the only mitigation that sort of system would handle would be any changes in stock numbers and stock type. Any other mitigations, it can't. Okay, so then you go across to the more complicated or sophisticated modelling type approach, which can handle all these different management options and mitigations and all the rest of it. The disadvantage, as I sort of touched on earlier, is the amount of information you require, and the fact that given that we're getting into sort of legal territory, if you like, is that you need to verify all this information as well. So just summarising up, where we're at is we're very confident in terms of the relationship between dry matter intake and methane, less confident about dry matter intake and nitrous oxide. We can't measure greenhouse gas emissions at a farm level, so we have to model. In terms of looking at changing in farm systems and or land use change, very complex, and again, you have to model that through a range of different modelling. Mentioned before, if you're modelling at a farm level, a lot of data needs to be required. One thing we've found, and it's probably a bit quick for you looking at those individual farm modelling results, but every farm is different. So if there's 300 people in here and you're all farmers and we all model exactly the same mitigation on your farm, we'd come up with 300 different results. The other thing, just talking about modelling and is measuring the trend over time, and it's been coming out now more on the, if I could look at the water quality and nitrogen side, A lot of these nitrogen discharge allowances are a set figure, okay, and in many areas you're not allowed to vary that year by year, whereas, for example, a 5-year rolling average actually gives a lot more flexibility to the way you might be able to manage your farm and the way you can manage some degree of climatic variation between seasons. It also brings in a new discipline, if you like, in the sense that if you go over your NDA, then at some stage you have to go under to balance it out, which can add a bit of excitement. And then the other thing that's certainly coming out with the nitrogen and NDAs and all the rest of it is, assuming you're using these different models to model all that, is when you have model or changes in versions and how they handle things, all things being equal, our models are going to get more and more sophisticated and hopefully better and better in science built into it. So I'd say it's inevitable that as the models change, we're going to come up with different answers, which you then have to flow backwards to the point where you started from and work it all through. So again, that adds a degree of excitement to the whole process. And that's me. Thank you.